In the early morning hours of December 16, 2022, St. Paul, Minnesota homicide detectives Abby DeSanto and Jennifer O'Donnell were called to a downtown apartment building to investigate a reported suicide. A 32-year-old woman named Alexandra Pennig had been found dead in her bathroom with a single gunshot wound to the head.
The call came in around 3 a.m., a panicked man on the line. He told the emergency dispatcher he needed an ambulance right away. He was hysterical, sobbing, and it was hard to understand his words. He said his friend, a woman, was dead inside an apartment. When police officers arrived at the Minneapolis building, they found him in the hallway, pacing and crying uncontrollably. He kept repeating, "Oh my God, what is she doing? And why'd she do that?" He was visibly shaking, a picture of pure shock and grief. The officers tried to calm him down, gently telling him to breathe slowly. His name was Matthew Ecker, and he appeared to be in deep distress. He led them to the door of an apartment. The door was slightly ajar. Matthew was hyperventilating so hard he could barely speak, but he managed to whisper that his friend was inside the bathroom. The officers cautiously entered the quiet apartment, unsure of what they would find. What they saw inside the bathroom would begin a tragic and complicated investigation. The police entered the apartment and found the victim in the bathroom. The scene was gruesome. A woman, later identified as Alex Pennock, was lying on the floor with a gunshot wound to her head. The man, Matthew Ecker, was still outside in the hallway, his loud cries filling the air. He was a married father of 4, but he told police he had been in a secret 2-year relationship with the victim. As more officers arrived, Matthew continued to weep, his emotions raw and on full display. The officers, trained to handle such situations, tried to gather basic information from him. They sat him down and spoke to him in a soft, reassuring tone. They told him to take his time, that he wasn't in a rush. Matthew's story began to pour out between his sobs. He talked about his affair with Alex, a secret that had weighed on him. He said they had been to a bar earlier that night. Matthew continued to tell his story to the police. He said he and Alex had been at a bar called Camp. While they were there, Alex's boyfriend had found them and confronted Matthew. The situation quickly turned into an argument, and Alex's boyfriend punched him. Matthew said that part of the story was true, and he was able to provide details that matched surveillance video from the bar. The footage showed the boyfriend approaching Matthew and Alex. Matthew stepped in front of Alex, and the boyfriend punched him. This part of Matthew's account seemed to check out, giving his story some credibility in the eyes of the police. Matthew then explained that after the fight, the boyfriend was kicked out of the bar. Matthew and Alex stayed for a while longer, about an hour, and then they left. Everything seemed fine, he insisted. They walked back to her apartment. Matthew said they were just talking and laughing, and there was no hint of what to come. He was painting a picture of a peaceful end to the evening, but that peace was about to be shattered. Matthew continued his rambling story to the police. He said that when they got back to Alex's apartment, he had his gun with him in his backpack. He has a permit to carry a concealed weapon. He told the officers that his gun was in his bag, which was sitting on a chair. He said Alex suddenly grabbed the backpack, took out the gun, and held it to her head. When an officer asked if she had made any threats to harm herself before, Matthew said no, that it had happened very quickly and without warning. He said she just grabbed the gun and put it to her head. The officers tried to get more details about what happened next. They wanted to know if they had been arguing, but Matthew insisted they hadn't. He said the argument at the bar had been with Alex's boyfriend, not with Alex. He repeated that after the bar fight, they were fine and things were calm. He said Alex had just been crying about something, but he wasn't clear about what. She had then gone into the bathroom, he claimed. The police were trying to get Matthew to focus on what happened inside the apartment, not the bar. Matthew kept getting off track, talking about going to other bars and recounting the earlier parts of the night. He seemed to be avoiding the main event, the reason the police were there, a dead woman with a gunshot wound. Another officer stepped in, cutting to the chase.
"How did you get into the bathroom?" the officer asked directly. Matthew said the door was locked. He claimed he heard a gunshot and then slammed his shoulder into the door to break it open. He went inside and saw what had happened. Then he said he ran back out because he couldn't find his phone to call 911. He said he looked for his phone, a black-cased Apple phone, but couldn't find it, so he used Alex's phone to call for help. The officers asked Matthew a critical question. Did you touch her at all? Matthew said yes, he did. He said he tried to give her first aid. He explained that he works as a nurse practitioner in an emergency room, so he knows what to do in a medical crisis. He said he saw her gasping for a few breaths and he tried to help her, to stop the bleeding. But then, in a shocking detail, Matthew said he realized there was nothing he could do. So he said he got up, went to the sink, and washed his hands. The officer then asked if he had called the police after washing his hands, and Matthew said yes. This detail immediately raised a major red flag for the officers. Matthew was talking about a severe injury with lots of blood, yet he claimed he washed his hands and got all the blood off. The officers noted that Matthew's clothes and hands were completely clean, with no visible signs of blood. The officers also knew that Matthew was lying about washing his hands because when they checked the bathroom sink, it was completely dry. There was no water or blood in it. They didn't let Matthew know they had caught him in this lie. Instead, they acted like they were on his side, showing him sympathy. They told him they were sorry for what he was going through and that he shouldn't have to sit in the hallway. They suggested he come to the police station to give a formal statement. They promised him it would be a more comfortable place to talk and process everything. Matthew agreed, and he was taken to the station. This was around 3:45 a.m. At the station, detectives began to interview him again around 6 a.m. They started by asking him to tell his story once more, from the beginning. Matthew started his story again, going all the way back to the bar. He described how he and Alex had gone there and how her boyfriend, Shane, had also been there. He said things got a little heated, and he got up and stepped between them. He repeated that Shane had punched him and that they fell to the floor. Matthew said the bartender and a bouncer quickly broke up the fight and kicked Shane out of the bar. He and Alex stayed for another hour, had a drink, and then walked back to her place. He explained again that he had a concealed carry permit and had his gun in his backpack. When they got to the apartment, he said he put the backpack on the couch. This was a crucial detail, as it was the first time he specifically mentioned where the backpack was placed. Matthew continued his story at the police station. He said that after they arrived back at Alex's apartment around 1:30 or 2 a.m., Alex went into his backpack, took out the gun, and cocked it. He claimed she held it to her head. He said he started to back away from her, and he asked her what she was doing. According to his story, she told him not to come any closer or she would pull the trigger. Matthew said he was confused and shocked because she had seemed fine on the way home, even laughing with him. He said she backed up toward her bathroom and went inside, then shut and locked the door. He said he then heard the pop of the gun going off. He claimed he tried to get in, but the door was locked, so he had to shoulder slam it open. This was a new, more detailed version of his story. Inside the apartment, Matthew said he found Alex on the floor. He claimed that despite his medical training, he didn't know what to do. He said he saw a hole in her head and blood everywhere. He said he tried to hold her, and then he moved the gun. He told the detectives that when he realized he couldn't do anything to save her, he got up, washed his hands for some reason, and then looked for his phone. He couldn't find his phone, so he used hers to call 911. The detectives asked him what he was wearing that night, and he said the same clothes he was wearing then, a shirt and jeans. The detectives noted that his clothes were completely clean, with not a speck of blood on them. This was a major point of suspicion for them, as they had seen the gruesome scene in the bathroom. While Matthew was being interviewed at the police station, other officers went to the apartment of the man who had punched Matthew at the bar. His name was Shane. They told Shane they were there to talk to him about his friend who had been injured. Shane acted confused and said he didn't know anything about it. He initially denied even knowing Matthew.
He then admitted that he knew Alex, saying he had been dating her. He still insisted he hadn't seen her the night before. The officers told him that a witness had placed him with Matthew and Alex at the bar. Shane maintained his innocence. The officers then delivered the shocking news. Alex was not okay. She had passed away. Shane's face fell, and he reacted with genuine disbelief and grief. He couldn't believe she was really gone. The police were trying to get Shane to come with them to the station for an interview. Shane was still in shock, saying that he had been talking about moving in with Alex. He couldn't understand how this could have happened. An investigator on the phone with Shane reassured him that he wasn't in any trouble. They just needed to talk to him about what happened. Shane still seemed scared, saying he hadn't done anything. He finally agreed to talk, but first he wanted to get his things from the apartment. As he did, he admitted to the officers that he had been with Alex the night before and had gotten into a fight with a guy who he said he didn't know. He admitted he had punched the guy. Shane insisted that he and Alex had left the bar separately and that he had gone straight home. He told them that surveillance cameras would prove he left. This part of his story lined up with what Matthew had said, which helped to confirm the bar fight. Back at the station, the detectives started to challenge Matthew's story more directly. They told him they wear gloves at a crime scene so they don't get blood on their hands. They pointed out that if he had held Alex's head, as he claimed, his hands and fingernails should have been covered in blood. Matthew's hands were perfectly clean. The detectives also brought up the gun. He claimed he had moved the gun and placed Alex's hand back on it. But they told him that Alex's hands were clean, with no blood on them. This was a major inconsistency. Matthew couldn't explain this. He stuck to his story that Alex had shot herself. He insisted they hadn't been arguing and that she had locked the bathroom door. The detective suggested maybe they struggled for the gun and it accidentally went off, but Matthew adamantly denied that. The detectives continued to press Matthew on the details. They pointed out that if he had washed his hands in the sink, as he claimed, there should have been blood on the sink handle. There was no blood at all, and the sink was completely dry. Matthew insisted he had rinsed his hands there. The detectives were frustrated, explaining to him that his story wasn't adding up. They told him that in a suicide, there is typically blood and even brain matter on the gun and the surrounding walls, but in this case, the gun was clean, and there was nothing on the walls. Matthew couldn't explain these facts either. He just kept repeating his main claim. The door was shut when the gun went off. He was sticking to his story, but the evidence was starting to point in a different direction. The detectives tried a different approach. They told Matthew that they didn't want him to dig a deeper hole for himself by continuing to lie. Matthew repeated that he wasn't lying and that the door was shut when the gun went off. The detectives then told him they knew he was a doctor, and they asked him to explain how he could have held a bleeding wound and placed a hand on a gun without getting blood on his hands. Matthew said he didn't know, that his brain wasn't working in that situation. He just kept saying he had adjusted her head and that there was blood all over the floor. The detectives pointed out that the gun was clean and didn't have any blood on it, even though he said he had moved it. Matthew insisted that the gun had been on the floor away from the blood pool. He was trying to adjust his story, but the contradictions were getting worse. The detective showed Matthew a picture of a piece of a door lock. They told it was found under Alex's body. Matthew had said that he broke the locked door open. The detectives explained that this small piece of evidence proved he indeed kicked the door open. However, they pointed out a key inconsistency. If the door was locked when the shot went off, as he claimed, it would have been locked when Alex's body fell on it. But the body was found on top of the broken lock, which suggests the door was kicked open before she fell. This piece of evidence strongly suggested that Matthew kicked the door open, shot her, and then her body fell on the lock, trapping it underneath her. Matthew's story about the locked door was unraveling. He was silent for a moment. The detectives gave Matthew one last chance. They told him they were going to talk to a lot of people, Shane, his wife, and others. They told him they just wanted to know the truth. They suggested that perhaps he got into a struggle with Alex over the gun and it accidentally went off. They said that if that was the case, it would be a much different situation than what he was claiming. They said all the evidence they had collected so far did not match his story. Matthew didn't respond for a moment. He was finally backed into a corner, with his lies falling apart.
The detectives were calm and patient. They told him that the truth was the only thing that could help him at this point. The detective showed Matthew photos of his 4 children. They asked him to think about them. This was a direct, emotional appeal. They said, "I hope you don't love her more than them." They were giving him a way out of his lie, to tell the truth for the sake of his family. He finally cracked. He said, "I did do this." But then he immediately backtracked, saying that door was closed. He seemed to be trying to hold on to his story while also confessing. He said he loved Alex and that she had shut the door and shot herself. The detective told him that the scene and the evidence showed a completely different story. They told him this wasn't a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The detectives gave him one final warning. Once they left the room, his story was set. There would be no other chance to change it. The detectives presented the final conclusion to Matthew. His story was not believable, and the evidence proved it. Matthew's story about a suicide behind a locked door was disproven by the physical evidence, especially the location of the broken door lock. The lack of blood on his hands and clothes was a key indicator. The fact that the gun was clean also suggested that it was not a close contact shot, as it would be in a suicide. The detectives told him he was looking at a first-degree murder charge instead of something lesser like manslaughter. Matthew was immediately arrested. He was charged with the murder of Alex Pennock. The police were confident in their case because Matthew's entire story was based on lies that the physical evidence easily disproved. During the trial, more details about the case came out. It was revealed that Alex Pennock had struggled with mental health issues and drug addiction. It was also discovered that Matthew Ecker, a nurse practitioner, had actually been prescribing drugs to Alex during their secret relationship. This new information painted a more complicated picture of their 2-year relationship and added to the case against him. The prosecution argued that Matthew's story of a sudden, unprovoked suicide was a complete fabrication and that he had planned to kill her. The jury listened to all the evidence, including Matthew's inconsistent statements, the testimony from the police officers, and the scientific evidence from the crime scene. They had to decide who was telling the truth, Matthew or the evidence. The jury carefully considered everything. They looked at the inconsistencies in Matthew's story, like the dry sink and the clean gun. They thought about the broken door lock found underneath Alex's body. They also heard about Matthew's secret relationship and his history of prescribing drugs to Alex, which suggested a level of control and manipulation. The jury did not believe Matthew's claim that Alex had shot herself. The facts simply did not line up. After a deliberation, they came back with a verdict. The jury found Matthew Ecker guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for the murder of Alex Pennock. He had told the police he loved her and called her a friend, but the court found that he had taken her life. The case was closed, and Matthew began serving his sentence. A while after his conviction, Matthew Ecker tried to appeal the decision. He and his lawyers claimed that the evidence against him was not strong enough. They argued that the case was based on a lot of circumstances and not enough hard proof. They were trying to get his sentence overturned. Matthew was still maintaining his innocence. He insisted that the jury's decision was wrong and that he was being unfairly punished. The appeals court, which consisted of a 3-judge panel, reviewed all the details of the case. They looked at the original evidence, including the police reports, the crime scene photos, and the testimony from the officers. They considered Matthew's arguments and his claim that the evidence was too thin. The 3 judges on the appeals court panel were in agreement. They all unanimously denied Matthew's argument. They decided that the evidence, while circumstantial in some ways, was more than enough to prove his guilt. They believed the police's account of a staged suicide was correct. Matthew's lies, which were clearly shown through the body camera footage and the police interviews, played a major role. His behavior at the scene, the lack of blood on him, the dry sink, and the location of the door lock all pointed to his guilt. The court upheld his murder conviction, and Matthew would continue to serve his 30-year prison sentence. His last hope for freedom was gone. The story of Matthew Ecker and Alex Pennock shows how lies can unravel under the weight of evidence. Matthew's initial show of grief and his complicated story of a bar fight and a sudden suicide were all an attempt to hide the truth.
but the detectives were able to see through it. They used physical clues, a clean shirt, a dry sink, a misplaced door lock, and Matthew's own words to prove that his story was a lie. The final confession, though quickly taken back, showed that he knew he was guilty. The case became a lesson in how police work can uncover the truth even when a suspect tries to create a false reality. Matthew Ecker will now spend a long time in prison, paying for a crime he claimed he didn't commit, but one that the evidence proved he did.